Hello, and welcome to this video. Hello, and welcome to today's video. As you've probably seen, judging by the title, today I would like to talk about the idea of the pacifist myth, which I believe is an idea that is much more prominent in Western culture than any other culture. But before we get started, I did want to thank everyone for the response I got on my last video. As of right now, I have 69 subscribers, which is very funny to me for obvious reasons. And I also did want to apologize for my hair. I usually curl my hair every day, but it gets very tiring, and I didn't curl my hair today. This is the remnants of the work I did yesterday, so you're looking at a bit of bedhead right now. But if the idea of, violence is never the answer is fascinating to you, then you should definitely keep watching, because I think this will be a very short video. Okay, so starting off strong, what is the pacifist myth? I can never say that correctly. I feel like I have a bit of a lisp, but moving on. The pacifist myth is the idea, or rather the westernized idea, that freedom or the path to escaping oppression is only valid when accomplished through nonviolent upheaval or peaceful revolution. So it's a very dramatic shift from the older and more conservative idea of might is right, which very paradoxically is still around today, as you've probably seen by the many international armed conflicts around the world. So just as Western thought has utilized the past 2 centuries to spread the idea that democracy is kind of the only valid system of governance, peaceful protest has been also uplifted as the only civilized way to express political discontent. So these 2 ideas are best seen linked when you look at the way America uses the excuse of, upholding or establishing democracy to completely destroy nations, usually third world nations or nations popularized by people of color, and the way that peaceful protest has often been used to vilify rebellion and dramatic political disturbance backed by displays of physical force. I believe that there are 2 ways in which this pacifist myth can be, explored, one through the lens of race and one through the lens of class. In this video, I will attempt to very briefly touch on them both. So I'm sure, as everyone watching this video knows, America and the rest of the Western world have a very long and very unflattering relationship with the concept of race. Throughout their history, you can see that they do not handle it well. But I believe that when it comes to America, it's best to search for correlations of race and violence in more recent struggles. So I picked the struggle for Black liberation, and specifically I wanted to contrast the legacies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. So I'm sure, as many of us know, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were both Black radicals who fought for the rights of their people and an end to American segregation. Both were ministers, both died via assassinations, and both were beloved by their respective factions. One, however, has, a national holiday, is very consistently taught in schools, and has a very flattering legacy, while the other's legacy is more controversial and a name that slips further and further into history's past. So if we look at these 2 dichotomies, how does the pacifist myth play into this? So both of these men fought for Black liberation, but they used very different ideologies. So whereas Malcolm X believed that Black Americans had to secure their rights with, quote, any means necessary, up to and including the use of armed force, King was more of a pacifist. His methods centered on peaceful protests and nonviolent strategies. So King was raised in a very good family with a proper education, and his story is entirely different from Malcolm X's, who basically earned the street name Detroit Red after leading a street gang and dealing drugs. He was thrown into jail at 21 after the loss of his mother and father in childhood. His father murdered by a white supremacist and his mother committed to an insane asylum. So obviously, 2 very different worlds. I believe that the differences between these 2 men can be best seen in their interactions with JFK, who aided actually in the release of King from prison 8 days prior to his election victory, a move that many people believe contributed to his very meager surplus of votes. On the other hand, Malcolm X famously commented, quote, chickens coming home to roost, in response to the president's assassination, pointing out the justice of a violent society suffering from violence. Obviously, this was a very controversial thing to say, and it's clear that King's nonviolent stance is what brought him nationwide approval, whereas Malcolm's opposing belief brought him great opposition. However, in response to King, he famously says, concerning nonviolence, it is criminal to teach a man not to defend himself when he is the constant victim of brutal attacks, which I personally believe is true. This raises a question, however. If King really was loved where Malcolm was not, where is his proof and where is his reward for following the rules of the oppressive system in which he was forced to live? So John Edgar Hoover, who was the former director of the FBI, told the agency's New York office to, and I quote, do something about Malcolm X. When it came to the Black Panthers, the militant and socialist Black Power group that rose in response to both police brutality and Malcolm X's assassination, Hoover declared them the biggest threat to national security. His stance on Martin Luther King, despite King's nonviolence, was exactly the same. Hoover was personally hostile toward King and subjected him to multiple types of FBI surveillance. This raises another question. If it's clear that King, Malcolm X, and the Panthers were all treated with the same level of hateful disregard by the literal director of the FBI, why is King's nonviolence valued so much more as a society? This is most likely because pacifism is a much more useful tool for those in power. Peaceful protests are, forgive me for saying, very easily ignored, and by focusing on the pacifist aspect of King's legacy, it's possible to shape him into a man deemed more acceptable by American society. So, everyone who's heard of King has probably heard of his I Have a Dream speech, but I'm guessing less have heard of his calls towards socialism or his condemnation of the American war in Vietnam, most likely because, these don't fit the image of the perfect activist, one that doesn't actively threaten the status quo. So just as condemning violence has been used to halt more radical revolutions fighting for a better, more racially equitable America, the same myth is used to keep the lower classes complacent. Okay, I hope that you will forgive me for quoting Machiavelli, but he writes, "And in every republic there are two parties, that of the nobles and that of the people, and all the laws that are favorable to liberty result from the opposition of these parties to each other." So if this is true and America really does stand for liberty as it so proclaims, why are the demands of their own allegedly free people being denied, right? Why are they being fed rarely useful methods of rebellion or social discontent? This is actually very, very simple. America doesn't hate violence, not like it says it does. If America really hated violence, think about it, it wouldn't have the largest army in the world and it wouldn't have a police force that actively brutalizes its citizens. Instead, it would, if it didn't value violence, spend more money on things like healthcare, social security, and commitments to safety. However, it doesn't do any of these things because it wants a monopoly on violence. America doesn't hate violence, it hates non-state violence because it, like any other powerful state, is aware that violence is the ultimate weapon, much more than things like diplomacy or economic pressure, which it teaches its people to use. By perpetuating the pacifist myth, it demonizes those who stand a chance at actually challenging society, ensuring that power remains exactly where it is now, in the hands of the state. I hope you will forgive me for quoting Machiavelli again, but I really do like his work. He says, "Nobody should be so lacking in brains as to believe that if his house is collapsing, God will save it without any other support, for he will die beneath the wreckage." But we do believe this. Why have we bought entirely into the pacifist myth, and how has it consumed us so thoroughly? In one part, I think that it's due to the individualistic nature cultivated by the West. So, despite modern technology and massive urban centers, people are basically more isolated than ever before, making it hard to organize or overcome the fear that haunts us. Additionally, labels such as, left or right, or things like identity politics basically separate the lower class, changing our attention to things that don't really matter. Additionally, the pacifist myth calls for violence against the state to halt, but it doesn't really talk about interstate conflict. International armed conflict has been steadily increasing the past few years, instilling in people, a fear towards violence as they're forced to confront the horrors of war, while the rich, powerful perpetrators of these conflicts are never really forced to face its reality. I don't think that it's a crazy thing to believe that wars are profitable, but I believe that its byproduct is more than economic gain. So I think that it's in people who are so traumatized by violence that it can no longer seriously comprehend revolution. So whereas citizens live by spending money in the state, states live by spending lives in the international system. In King's first speech as the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association before the Montgomery bus boycott, King says, "We have no alternative but to boycott." I believe this is patently untrue, and I'm pretty sure that Malcolm X would agree with me in saying that there are many other ways to protest, just ones that have been forgotten or less accepted. I also believe that the pacifist myth has led to this idea of the perfect victim or perfect innocence. This means that victimhood, or being a victim, is something that isn't given to you. It isn't like something bad happens to you, you're a victim. It's something you have to earn. And because victimhood is something that you have to earn, it's something that can also be taken away from you. So if you don't follow the pacifist myth, if you fight back against your oppressors, you are no longer the perfect victim. Therefore, you are no longer a victim at all. There are a lot of byproducts to this, but I think the most interesting byproduct to this is how much we value animal life. So when it comes to human conflict or war, there's always like a good side or a bad side. Everyone chooses their side, right? But when it comes to animals, for example, animals aren't intelligent like humans are, right? Dogs are just dogs. They don't partake in politics. They don't have opinions, which is why you have some of, I don't know, the most racist, the rudest, the most awful people you could meet saying things like, I think all animals are innocent, and when I see a dog crying, I just feel so sad, right? And it's because animals have earned perfect victimhood, whereas that is a state almost impossible to achieve by humans. And by valuing this perfect victimhood, it devalues actual human life, which is so fascinating. Of course, you can argue that fire cannot be used to fight fire, and like violence can't be used to fight violence, but I think that injustice and oppression are less like fire and more like the ocean. For example, they are both overwhelmingly dangerous, they're deeper than we know, and they're prone to sudden attacks, right? So the ocean can't be reshaped or conquered into something softer. I think that it, like systems of oppression, can only be abandoned in search of newer land or newer systems. The pacifist myth, however, has made it so that we are scared to set sail for newer lands, we are scared to fight to build a ship for newer lands, and we are scared of losing that label of perfect victimhood or perfect innocence. So it's a very brilliant strategy, I think, and one that I don't see talked a lot about because I like to examine it from like a philosophical place. I am privileged enough to come from a state that hasn't seen war, at least not as long as I'm alive. But I think that it's very interesting that anytime people bring this up, they're accused of promoting violence or something, which I don't think is the case. And I think that that label of terrorist promoting violence is just a way to like halt the conversation on this. So that is all I have for today. Hopefully that was not too long-winded or anything. If that fascinated you, you should tell me why that fascinated you and what aspects fascinated you. And if you disagreed, you should also tell me what you disagreed on, because I read all of your comments and I'm so interested. I love having conversations, as you could probably tell. Before I end this video, I just wanted to read out one quote, and it goes, "At the trial of God, we will ask, why did you allow this? And the answer will be an echo, why did you allow this?" And I saw that quote and I started thinking, so that was kind of the premise of the video. So something to think about until I see you next time. And once again, thank you so much.